of the MAGA twits and all of the right wingers telling me how this is going to be great for America. We're gonna crush those government unions, and we'll be able to use all that money that we steal from them, and by lowering their wages and stealing their health care and destroying their pensions. We're going to use all that for, guess what? More tax cuts. And who do you think's going to get those tax cuts? Sure as shine is not going to be you or me. The wealth class of this country, who invested lots of money in this decision, invested lots of money in getting the Supreme Court that they want, who's going to side with business at all costs, the Republican Party that they want, who is going to destroy the ability to bargain, to fight for better wages, hours, conditions, all of that stuff. Mission accomplished. Congratulations, investor class. You've won to this point. Now, we could easily throw up our hands and go, well, the Supreme Court, it's bad, it's horrible, and the sky's falling, and it's going to be miserable. It's going to be. But this is where, as I've been telling people today, it's going to get bad. It's going to happen. And I hate saying that. I hate believing that in the next decade, we're going to go through another Bush era type recession, probably even worse, because we won't be able to respond because we'll be so deeply in debt, and that people are going to suffer. People are going to struggle. Workers are going to lose their job. Wages will be destroyed. Benefits will be a thing of the past. And what comes out of that? What springs out of the fire of disaster is what, again, you think about the fourth turning. We are seeing that happening right before our eyes. Our kids are going to, they're going to fight long battles. They are going to struggle and fight so that their children can have the opportunities that they should have had. What we're doing right now for political sportsmanship, because that's what all this is about. That's what these MAGA trolls are really all about. Our team won, not really understanding that eventually it's going to bite them in the behind. Because if you lower the wages, you lower the benefits, you make the conditions worse, you destroy the 8-hour day, you destroy overtime, you do those things that are all part of the no rights at work agenda, it affects everyone equally across the board. It doesn't matter if you were a Trump supporter or not. So all of those Trump supporters who are gloating today, we won. I don't know what you won. Still trying to figure out what you personally won. Unless you're a billionaire, unless you're one of the big money winners in this game, I don't know what a working class maggot twit got out of this decision. Other than the ability to say our team won. That's the weird thing to me. Because we're all going to suffer from it. We're all going to see lower wages. We're all going to see the negatives that come out of this. All you have to do is look at right to work states now. All you have to do is look at states where public sector workers don't have any bargaining. And guess what? The 22 states that the Supreme Court said, sorry, you don't have any rights, they're going to begin to look like Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina. Get ready for it, Pennsylvania. Get ready for it, New York. Get ready for it, Illinois. If you do not organize, band together, stay strong, and be willing to, as I've said, fold the arms and march in the streets. And it's going to get much uglier than it was in the past, because our government, the wealth class of this country, has made sure that every police department has, the finest tanks and the finest crowd control mechanisms. Because, hey, we really perfected it in Iraq. We've got sound cannons and goodbye guns, and we still got the old-fashioned water cannons, which, a mayor out in western Pennsylvania, because right now there were, mass protests over another black child being gunned down from behind by a policeman who, as I understand, was arrested today and will stand charges. But she said, we should bring out the hoses, and then sent out an image of Birmingham, of Bull Connor's department shooting people with water cannons. and bodies flipping down the road. That was her answer to peaceable protesters standing in the street and demanding that their government, demanding that there is action. This is what's going to happen. And every one of us are going to have to make the decision of which side of history are we going to be on? Which side of this reaction? Because there's got to be a reaction to this. Which side are you on? Now, this isn't going to be the last. This is most certainly not the last attack on workers' rights. It's not. We know this. This was just another. And you throw all of these slashes, all of the stabs, you throw all this together and you see what's going on. You're marching towards what I call the no rights at work agenda, where we're right back to where we were in the 1880s and 1890s. You have no rights. The boss is the master and you are the servant. And when he's done with you, to the curb with you, like trash. And I find it interesting because I've had a number of trolling millennials tell me, well, you know, I don't need the government to tell me how to work. I went to college. I'm smart. And I just, I struggle with the hubris and the arrogance and the smug thought that everything that they see right now, everything that they've walked into, they believe it's always been. And they believe that they're entitled to it and that they deserve it. They really have no clue that their great-grandparents and their grandparents literally fought, bled, and died for the 8-hour day. I had some idiot today tell me, no, it wasn't unions who did that. It was Henry Ford. And you go, it was decades of union organizing that pushed Ford into the 40-hour work week, into the 8-hour day, which only certain people got. And this is the part that the maggot trolls never really say, because Henry Ford, they had this great little thing because they wanted to make sure that you were leading a moral life. They would come and they would inspect your home to make sure it was clean. They would come and inspect your home to see if your kids were dressed, to see if your wife was up to moral code. They were involved in every aspect of your life. And if you didn't meet their standard, you didn't get the 40-hour work week. You didn't get the $5 an hour, or the $5 day. You didn't get any of that stuff. They always forget to mention that step forward there at Ford wasn't the first place to do it, but it was definitely one of the more intrusive. And we're heading back to this. Understand, we are. The theocracy is coming, and the next Supreme Court justice is going to move us further down the road. I've had a bunch of people tell me, and we'll talk about this later. I've had a bunch of people say, well, you know, with Kennedy going, they'll bring in another justice. It'll be a wash. And the reality is no, that's not actually completely true. We're going to see most of the progress of the 20th century just done away with. Kiss all of the workers' rights goodbye. Kiss women's rights goodbye. Kiss minority rights goodbye. And hey, hello, welcome to the theocracy, where employers now will be able to, because hey, they can tell you women if you can have birth control in your health care or not. They're going to be able to, I guarantee it, in the next 20 years, I guarantee you're going to see moral codes put into employment contracts. You're going to see moral codes put into evaluations and raises, and it's coming. And I hate to be the one to go, I'm telling you so, but I'm telling you, unless we act, unless this November there isn't a mass bloodshed electorally at the ballot box, and these Republicans pay a massive price, not just in the House but in the Senate. Because I'll tell you right now, the Supreme Court seat that is now open because Kennedy's leaving, the nomination and confirmation will be, I guarantee this, will be the fastest in the history of the Supreme Court. I guarantee the vetting process will be very Trumpian. And by Trumpian, I mean non-freaking existent. And then it's going to be surprise. Roe versus Wade goes next year. And a year or two down the road, they come after Griswold. A year after that, they come after all affirmative action and all same-sex marriage is done. And we start, I'm telling you, they're building the camps on the southern border. They're building internment camps as we speak to put hundreds of thousands of people away. I'm telling you, the prospect, the possibility of them using them against us, we the people, and I hate saying this, I cannot believe in this day and age, in this country, that we have to fear the possibility of our government disappearing people. But the sad reality is, it's possible. And that is a scary, scary prospect. And you go, but Rick, come on. This is only it's one little decision about, public sector workers, being able to freeload off of their union. You're going too far. You're a bit extreme. This is how it starts. And this is the scary part of it. I would love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Andrew Jans is going to be here to share some of his thoughts on his campaign, maybe some thoughts on the Supreme Court, all of that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1905. That was the day over 200 socialists, anarchists, and Marxists representing over 40 organizations met at Brands Hall in Chicago to convene the founding of the Industrial Workers of the World. Representatives from groups like the Socialist Party, Socialist Labor Party, and Western Federation of Miners joined together for an 11-day convention to discuss the future of industrial unionism and revolutionary struggle. Those present included Big Bill Haywood, James Connolly, Daniel De Leon, Eugene V. Debs, Lucy Gonzalez Parsons, Mother Jones, and many more. They hoped to cohere an alternative to the politically conservative business unionism of the American Federation of Labor. They sought to build on the legacy of the Knights of Labor and their motto of "an injury to one is an injury to all." They were determined to build an industrial union that organized workers regardless of skill level. They also distinguished themselves by opening their doors to men and women, black, white, and all immigrant workers, including Asians. Big Bill Haywood opened the first day's morning session with the following remarks, saying, quote, "This is the Continental Congress of the working class. We are here to confederate the workers of this country into a working class movement that shall have as its purpose the emancipation of the working class from the slave bondage of capitalism. There is no organization that has for its purpose the same object as that for which you are called together today. The aims and objects of this organization should be to put the working class in possession of the economic power, the means of life, in control of the machinery of production and distribution without regard to capitalist masters." For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So like I said, I'm just flipping beyond mad, but we've got to turn that into something. In November, as I've been saying for a while, the most important election of our lifetime, as they all are, but this one, I mean it. And November is the time we flip the House, we flip the Senate, we begin to undo some of the massive amounts of damage. And one of the places that I would love to see flipped is out in California's 22nd district, Devin Nunes's seat. That's why I've asked Andrew Jans to come talk with us. He's the Democratic candidate there in the 22nd. Andrew, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, thanks for having me on. Good evening.
I appreciate you taking time. I got to get to the Janice thing. I want to get your thoughts. You know, as somebody who hopefully will be our next representative from California's 22nd congressional district, how do we push back on that?
You know, this is a disaster for organized labor. And I can tell you, as somebody that is part of a bargaining organization, part of in my discipline, this is going to have negative impacts all across the board. Your listeners know this. I think the best thing that we can do now, in the meantime, is to make sure that we elect folks to our state houses all across the country. And there are, I think, some state legislative fixes that we could begin to work on. I know in California, we're working on a few things out here, some things that have been proposed. For example, charging non-union workers for arbitration or discipline process representation. We're talking about release time to recruit members. We're talking about shielding contact information from non-union groups who are trying to really undermine what we're doing. And then also mandatory union orientation to get exposure to the union and to leadership. And so I think that there's some legislative fix that we can do at the state level. Unfortunately, at the federal level, I think we're going to be in a bit of trouble for a few years until we win back Congress and the Senate. Today of all days, with what happened with Justice Kennedy, we really see that our elections have consequences, and the changing of the Supreme Court is definitely one of those places where there's been negative impact.
Yeah, and I would argue now more than ever we need a sane legislative body, because I do see us moving back and basically undoing the entire 20th century with the Supreme Court that could be placed here in the next year or two, depending on who Trump puts into this seat. How much further to the extreme is this person than not just Kennedy but Gorsuch, and then heaven forbid another one come up, then sadly it would be, in my view, over.
Yeah, it's a terrible set of circumstances, and we really need to focus and make sure that we get labor folks elected this year. We got to keep the Senate. We got to get the Senate back, and we got to get the House of Representatives. And then we got to set ourselves up for a run for the White House. We got to work together. I think we can do it. I think the energy is there, and I'm just so proud to be leading one of those efforts out here in California.
I'm with you. Like I said, out in California's 22nd. Devin Nunes, as one of my friends calls him, the Kremlin gremlin. Evidently, he's going on the offense against you. And going on the offense means, I guess, they're going to investigate the Obama administration more. Does he realize that Obama is not president anymore?
Well, it's insane. He's also attacking our state capitol. He's not a state legislator. He's not running for Assembly or Senate. And he's also attacking the largest newspaper in our region, the Fresno Bee. He spent a ton of money going after the paper in his first negative ad of the campaign. So I don't think that he's paying attention to the issues on the ground, and I don't think that he understands that his seat is in huge jeopardy. This is why we're a nationally targeted race. This is why millions of dollars have already been dumped into this race, and if he doesn't wake up, he's going to be without a job come January.
Well, I'm hoping that, because I look at his voting record, and I don't see anything that would give working people any bit of solace that he's actually got their back.
I've heard that he hasn't met with a labor organization in 10 years.
Not surprising. I mean, to be honest, you look at his voting record, not surprising at all. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if he had a 0% voting record with labor issues.
Yeah, we're challenging him to a debate. So far, he's shrugged off the idea of debate, but I think that it's important for the folks of this district, and even beyond the boundaries of this district, to understand where he's at on issues, because frankly, his position as a House Intelligence Committee chairman has national implications. And so I think that the American people, I think the people of this district, deserved a fair and honest debate on the issues, and we need to know where he's at.
No, I get that. So what are your constituents saying? I mean, if I'm in a district and the incumbent is running and just refusing to have a debate or town halls or any of that stuff, I got to think I don't want him.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, there is no reason for him not to debate me. The only reason that I can think of is that he's afraid. And so I'm going to continue bringing attention to the issue that he's refusing to engage in a discussion. I think that the voters of the district are entitled to know what his vision is for our district, compare and contrast that with my vision, which is one of working for working class Americans, making sure that our labor organizations are protected, making sure that teachers have the resources necessary to do the work to educate future Americans. And so I think that when the voters hear my message, I think that it's going to resonate across both party lines.
So as you're out talking to people, because, I look at someone like Nunes, with all of his midnight runs to the White House and all of the leaking in the Intelligence Committee and all of the shenanigans that it appears that he's involved in, and whatever he's involved in with the Russians, I have no idea. Are you hearing people in your district going, these kind of things that he's gotten into isn't helping our district? It isn't helping us at home? Because I hear that about a lot of people, but I'm curious about Nunes.
Oh, I mean, Nunes in particular, I've talked to folks that have known him for many years, and many of them have told me that he's really gone off the deep end, and this is something that was echoed by your senator in New York, Chuck Schumer, but that his Republican colleagues were saying the same thing. So something's happened between last year and this year. And the one thing that I know that happened between last year and this year, I mean, he was never a Trump supporter during the primary, but he got named to the Trump transition team. And apparently he's never left the team. He's still on Team Trump. And really his focus on this back and forth with the Department of Justice is really embarrassing to the district. And even beyond that, it's made him incapable of working with other members of Congress. And we need him to be able to work with other members of Congress to get stuff done here in the Central Valley, in my district, where we have we have major transportation needs, we have water needs, and the only way that we can get this done is if we can get other folks to partner with us. And given his track record, people don't trust him. He's abrasive, and he doesn't work well with others.
Yeah, and look, that looks like most of the Republican Party. So, enough about him. What would you do? What's the first thing that Andrew Jans would do? What's the first improvement, the first push forward? What would you do?
For me, I've been one of those candidates that took a pledge very early on not to take corporate PAC money. I think that the sheer amount of dollars that are involved in these political races is really the one thing that's holding back Congress and lawmakers in Washington from really working for the American people. And so if I get sent to Congress, one of the first things I'm going to do is sponsor a piece of legislation to end this dark money that's just so engulfed in our political system. I've talked to actually not too long ago some foreign exchange students from China, and I sort of explained our campaign finance laws to them, and they said that their country, that's textbook corruption. And so that's saying something from if that's coming from Chinese students. And so, I think that it's so important that we get back to work, and the only way that we can do that is to make sure that we elect folks to Congress that aren't owned by corporations and people that are working to undermine our American way of life and benefits for working class families.
Yeah, I'd personally like to see a ban on all corporate money. I'd like to see a hard caps put on things, and I would like to see some public financing of elections. So that average everyday people can run, that we can have a vigorous debate in primaries and during general elections of people who are going to be held accountable to the voters and not to their donors. Just kind of a pipe dream that I would love to see.
Rick, I'm glad that you brought that up about average everyday working Americans running for office. And they changed the rules at the FEC not too long ago to allow candidates to withdraw money from their campaign to supplement their income while they're on a leave of absence. And I'm still working full time because I can't afford to take a break. I got to pay bills like everybody else. I got a mortgage, I got a family, and I haven't been able to take leave. And so there's these provisions that allow us to run. I've been told that I shouldn't use this money for this purpose because then my Republican opponent will attack me for allegedly misusing campaign funds to enrich myself. And so we're really in this weird situation where they do have these laws in the books that are supposed to help working class Americans run for office, but a lot of us are afraid to use it for fear of attack by the right.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, how could he attack you? He's on the government dime. He is running while an incumbent paycheck collecting member of Congress. If he wants to give up his paycheck, maybe then you could make an argument, but he still collected a paycheck.
Oh yeah, and you know what? There's a lot there with respect to Nunes, and I hope that that journalists look into his misuse of taxpayer dollars. He takes an insane number of trips overseas, and sometimes he takes his wife, sometimes he takes his family, And I think that that isn't a proper use of taxpayer dollars. And if he does, bring that kind of stuff up, I think that we're going to try to bring light to those issues as well.
I think you got to do it anyway, because the reality is our campaign system is so corrupt and corrosive that someone's got to be the champion of some transparency and some oversight and a way to look. I've had people tell me, Rick, you should run for Congress, and I go, look, I don't have $3 million. I've checked the seat cushions. I've checked between the couch cushions. It ain't there.
Hey, Rick, I started with $0. You can do it. I mean, look at the candidate you have down there in Queens. If you got a good amount of people behind you, people that are willing to work for you and believe in your message, I think that more people like us running for office.
No, she's fantastic. And did you see her video? I mean, her video was just a knockout. Since it wasn't boxing
actually,
video.
Actually, my wife showed me her video. It is a great piece of media.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would love to see a lot of the bums get thrown out. I'm not speaking ill of Joe Crowley. I've had him on the show a couple of times, and I'm not speaking ill of him, but I'm glad to see that she moved forward. Last line of questioning I've got for you now, because the Mueller investigation is doing a lot of this. Hopefully, a lot of this stuff comes out soon. How much of what we're seeing with Trump and all that do you think Nunes is involved in? Or is there any talk of that in your district? Because, it's weird. As you pointed out, about a year ago, he kind of went crazy. And I got to wonder, I guess, maybe it's just me being, wondering, how deep this stuff goes. But I got to wonder if there's something holding him that people should know about.
Something happened on the transition team. He's very close to Michael Flynn. I think they're friends. And if you look at his last request for information from the Department of Justice, one of the things that he requested was any type of information relating to informants as to Michael Flynn, anybody that tried to contact him as a FBI informant. I think that's very telling. I also think that this is going to be one of the most important investigations in American history. So Robert Mueller has to get this right. And so these Republicans that are trying to rush this through, they're only doing it because they think that they can get Mueller to have a sort of, sloppy investigation that's not complete. And so we got to do what we can to make sure that we protect the integrity of this thing. It is so important that we figure out what the Russians did and which Americans worked with the Russians to interfere in our election, because we know what happened. That's a given. We just got to figure out who's responsible and bring them to justice.
And hold them accountable. Absolutely. I hope folks will check out your website, AndrewJansForCongress.com. We'll shoot it out, make sure people have an opportunity to sign up, to send a couple of bucks, to do all that stuff, to read more about your vision and your message moving forward. Andrew, great talking with you. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon.
Rick, anytime. I love your show. Keep up the good work.
Good stuff. Thanks so much. Again, AndrewJansForCongress.com. We'll get that out so folks can take a look at it. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
First ones to starve, we're the first ones to die. The first ones in line for that pie in the sky. And we're always the last when the crab is shed out. For the worker is working when the fat counts the bar. We're the first ones to starve. We're the first ones to die.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1880. That was the day that Helen Keller was born in Tuscumbia, Alabama. 2 years later, she lost both her sight and hearing due to an illness. With the help of a teacher by the name of Anne Sullivan, Helen learned how to communicate again. Her inspiring story was retold in the play and movie, The Miracle Workers. Keller spent the rest of her life advocating for people with disabilities, as well as a woman's right to vote and a woman's right to birth control. But did you know she was also an outspoken supporter of the cause of labor? Helen was a socialist and a member of the Industrial Workers of the World Union. In 1912, Helen sent a check to support textile workers on strike in Little Falls, New York. She accompanied the check with a letter that captured her commitment to the labor movement. She wrote of the women out on strike, quote, "Their cause is my cause." If they are denied a living wage, I also am denied. While they are industrial slaves, I cannot be free. My hunger is not satisfied while they are unfed. I cannot enjoy the good things of life which have come to me if they are hindered and neglected. I want all the workers of the world to have sufficient money to provide the normal standard of living, a decent home, healthful surroundings, opportunity for education and recreation. I want them all to have the same blessings I have. I, deaf and blind, have been helped to overcome many obstacles. I want them to be helped generously in a struggle which resembles my own in many ways. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
United we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
We need to stand united for undivided, we shall never fall. Remember all, we need to trust in and then forever call our brothers and our sisters. And are you and I are when you and I both know that we can rely on it. The time is prime, planets align, ain't no mistaking. For union resurrection, the anger has awakened. The sleeping giant, come on, yeah, we can do it. We need to revive, re-amp, and re-up the labor movement.
No truer words spoken, especially on this day as the Supreme Court on the way out the door. And as I said back in February, they would do. It was going to be one of the last cases as they're running out the door, throwing it behind them and going, hey, look at the chaos that we're causing. Look what we're doing as we're running out the door. And I'm telling you, this is an ugly moment, and it's going to get worse with the announcement of Anthony Kennedy heading for the door. And here to share some thoughts, not just on the Supreme Court case, but also on the Supreme Court moving forward. I've asked Elliot Mintzberg to come talk with us. He's senior fellow over at the People for the American Way. Elliot, thanks for taking time for us.
Pleasure to be with you, Rick.
So were you surprised by the court's decision? I mean, were you surprised that Alito wrote it and the nonsense that came out of it?
No, unfortunately not. As you last year, back when the court only had 8 members because of the death of Justice Scalia, the court split 4-4 on a very similar case. Even Justice Kennedy, who has been previously reluctant to overrule previous cases, made clear that he was ready to overrule this one. The only question was what Justice Gorsuch would do, and that wasn't really a question at all. Alito, who had written a couple of previous opinions leaning in the direction, wrote this one, which could potentially deal a devastating blow to public sector unions.
No, and the other part of it is also going as far as to not just say that you can opt out. They've created an environment where you have to opt in.
Exactly right. I mean, just for your listeners who aren't familiar with all the background, basically this has to do with what happens when you have a public sector union, a teachers union, a firefighters union, which has organized, which has been recognized by the state or local government as doing the bargaining. And when they do the bargaining, of course, they do it primarily for their members, but if there are people who choose not to join the union, the benefits of the collective bargaining help them as well. So what usually happens to avoid kind of a free rider problem is that the state or local government requires the payment of what's called a fair share fee, not the same amount as union dues, not to cover political and other activities, but just to cover the cost of doing the basic collective bargaining work that benefits every employee, whether they're a union member or not. The Supreme Court ruled today that that was unconstitutional, overruling a precedent over 40 years old.
Yeah, it's amazing. And one of the things that I read that was, in the decision, that kind of was just kind of one of the dumbest things I think I've heard in a very long time. It was, and this is just it's amazing to me how this was written. They wrote in it that Mr. Janus, quote, strenuously objects to this free rider label. He argues that he is not a free rider on a bus headed for a destination that he wishes to reach, but more like a person shanghaied into an unwanted voyage. And I'm going, that's got to be probably one of the dumbest ways I've heard that put. One of the most outrageous. Look, if you don't want to be on the bus, get off.
Well, and indeed, the court makes clear another point in the opinion that he does get the parts of the ride that he likes, which is the benefits of the union contract.
Right.
I mean, Alito also says that you can't have a situation where those who refuse to join the union are treated differently in terms of wages than those who are in the union. So it's a total catch-22 for the unions, and as Justice Kagan pointed out in her dissent, could potentially have devastating consequences for public sector unions across the country in the 22 odd states that are not right to work laws. In essence, what this does is require those 22 states to become pretty much like right to work states,
right,
and harm the unions.
So here's the thing that gets me, and I don't think I ever want to hear Justice Roberts or any of them talk about being tenthers or states' rights. I don't think I want to hear conservatives talk of states' rights ever again, because you just usurped the rights of 22 states.
Exactly correct. Exactly correct. And what they did, as Justice Kagan also pointed out, and this is something worth mentioning, this continued a trend of the right-wing justices of taking the First Amendment, whether it's free speech or freedom of religion, and turning it from a shield against improper action into a sword to puncture other people's rights. And that happened in the Hobby Lobby case. It happened in the Citizens United case, where the court used the same, in my view, incorrect, if not perverted, interpretation of the First Amendment to strike down campaign finance laws. And this is one of the things that the far right justices are very interested in doing, and I think unfortunately will continue to.
So let me ask you this, because as I'm looking at this, is it possible that I don't have to pay my taxes anymore? I mean, our government does a lot of things I'm not thrilled about. I don't want to be on that bus. I don't want to be on that voyage, Elliot. I shouldn't have to pay for it.
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting theory. My guess is that this Supreme Court majority would say paying general taxes is very different than supporting a union, which the right-wing justices regard as something very different. But I think you could, by the same theory that Alito is using, you could certainly make that argument.
I mean, because it's what it seems to me, and it's one of those questions that I've asked numerous times. I mean, if we're going to start slicing and dicing things, I guess now I get to get all of the benefits of the Chamber of Commerce. I guess, now we're opening the door to a lot of associations that I may have never been a member of, but now I want their benefits. Can I make an argument for that?
Well, one important question is whether and how this applies in a private context. Remember, these are public sector unions, and it's technically the government that's requiring the payment of these funds. Let's to take the simpler example, let's ask the question: what happens if GM is unionized and they have a similar free rider rule that requires payment of some amount for those who decide not to be in the union? Is that unconstitutional? Hard to argue it violates the First Amendment, because General Motors or the associations you refer to aren't government agencies. But with this majority on the Supreme Court, who knows?
Yeah, who knows? And now we find out today that Kennedy, which I got to be honest, I was fairly surprised. He hired clerks. People were saying, you don't usually hire your law clerks for the coming year unless you're sticking around. What are your thoughts of him going? I mean, look, I don't see him as much of a liberal. I don't see him much as the moderate anymore. But there are some things that he kept kind of in check. But on most things that are important to me, he was on the wrong side of anyway. So replacing him with someone crazy is just, in my view, keeping the court the way it is. But there are a lot of things that will be under attack.
I wish I could agree with that. That was probably true in large measure when Gorsuch replaced Scalia. There wasn't a real change. But Kennedy has done some critically important things. If it weren't for him, LGBTQ people would have none of the rights they have today, whether it's the right to marry, the right not to be subject to terrible criminal laws that criminalize their behavior. The list goes on and on and on and on. Were it not for him, it's quite likely that Roe versus Wade would have been overruled by now, because in several decisions, including the important Casey decision a while ago, he held out for not overruling Roe and preserving the right to choose. Were it not for Kennedy, affirmative action would be gone altogether. The Fair Housing Act would be crippled as an effective enforcement tool. The EPA would not have the power to regulate greenhouse gases. Not that this one will do much, but another one hopefully in the future will. The list, unfortunately, goes on for quite a ways. And while I agree with you entirely that Kennedy has been a very conservative member of the court, he's been extremely different than the other members of the conservative majority, who I consider much further to the right.
No.
And if you replace Kennedy with somebody like Gorsuch, all those decisions we just talked about, all those protections for a women's right to choose, for civil rights, for LGBT people, are unfortunately likely to go out the window. Look what happened today. With Kennedy's agreement, you had an overruling completely of a decision only 40 years old, the same decade that Roe versus Wade was decided. Does anybody seriously think that with another Gorsuch on the Supreme Court, we wouldn't in a very short time see overruling of Roe, Obergefell on equal marriage rights, and a number of other important decisions?
No, I fully expect that to happen. I mean, what I was saying is on worker rights issues, on a lot of things. But you're right. The affirmative action is probably going to go the way of the dinosaur. I fear we become much more of a police state, because if you look at just last week, or just the other day, you had the decision on the cell phones that he was on the wrong side of. I look at this stuff and I go, I fear what the future looks like, because it looks like we're going back to the 80s and not the 1980s.
Well, although if you look at the 1980s, again, Kennedy was very important. I mean, actually a little bit later than that, under George W. Bush, he cast a critical deciding vote and wrote the opinion in the Boumediene case that basically said that the Bush administration couldn't take people and lock them up in Guantanamo without them being able to file a writ of habeas corpus. Again, imagine if he's replaced by somebody more like Gorsuch. The result is Trump not only reopens previously closed secret prisons, but probably renovates them as well and sticks lots of people there and has a Supreme Court that lets him do whatever he wants to.
No, I don't even say secret ones. I said the other day that they're looking at military bases throughout the South and Southwest to turn into gulags or internment camps or detention centers to hold hundreds of thousands of people. And I'm saying, they're not just looking at immigrants. Eventually, they're going to come for some of us. And I worry, and I know that sounds like hyperbole, but I fear that some of us get disappeared. And with an extreme Supreme Court, you're right. I fear that our right to habeas corpus is in jeopardy.
I hope you're wrong, but it's not, unfortunately, not at all an unreasonable fear in light of what we're facing, and it's absolutely critical that the American people rise up and do their best to influence the Senate, including at least a few Republican members, to stand up against this. Because if you look at the people on the list that Trump has already pledged he will choose from, the potential Supreme Court nominee list, a lot of them are right there with Gorsuch, or even further to the right than Gorsuch is in some instances. The only way it's going to be stopped is if somehow the American people can get at least a few Republican senators to not go along, to either put off the vote until after the November election, which Senate Democrats are already asking for, since that, after all, is what Mitch McConnell got back when President Obama nominated somebody to replace Scalia. And if that doesn't work, to defeat a far-right, narrow-minded, elitist nominee, which is, I'm confident, what we will get from President Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I keep saying, and I've said this today a couple of times, this will be the fastest nomination and confirmation I think, in the history of the Supreme Court. Because while, like you, I would like to see it held off until after the election, there is no way in a cold day that that Mitch McConnell is going to wait until after the election, with the chance of them losing the Senate and losing this opportunity to really solidify the court for a generation of crazy.
Well, I think that is certainly what McConnell is thinking. The only question is, I mean, it would be possible if you had 51 senators who opposed the idea of having a vote before November to stop that. And I could potentially see a Republican senator like Susan Collins or somebody else saying, look, I don't want to actually vote against the nominee at this point, but I will vote to hold this till after the election till we see what happens.
Is it possible somebody like Flake, someone like Corker, someone who's got nothing left to lose, is it possible that maybe John McCain, is it possible to see them say,
right,
whoever they put forth is a bit too crazy? Or
those are possibilities. Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, because both she and Senator Collins have certainly indicated how important they think Roe versus Wade is, and there is absolutely no question it's in major jeopardy if another Gorsuch or somebody even worse replaces Kennedy on the court.
So, last question I've got for you: what should our listeners do tomorrow? Because, as I've said, this is going to be a very short window. What do folks wake up tomorrow doing?
Tomorrow, they need to contact their senators immediately and push to stop Trump from being able to put a far right nominee on the Supreme Court, and even to have a vote before the election.
I'm right there with you, Elliot. I appreciate the thoughts, the time, the insight. Good stuff. I wish it was better. I wish it were better circumstances, but I appreciate the time.
I agree with you entirely, but you and your listeners are critical to what has to happen, and I hope your listeners will take action. Go to our website at pfaw.org. We will, no doubt, by this evening and tomorrow, have even more information on the web.
Good stuff. Elliot, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're more than welcome.
As I said, you got to call, you got to fax, you got to sit down, old-fashioned, old school, get a piece of paper and a pen, write out a letter, send it snail mail with a stamp on it. Send it to your senator, the crazy one. Here in Pennsylvania where I'm at, Pat Toomey. You got to send it to Toomey. To me, it's that simple. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. A new UN report on global drug use finds an increasing share of the world's population is using and abusing drugs. 1 in 18 people are now considered regular drug users, and 1 in 9 of them suffer from drug use disorders. UN General Assembly President Miroslav Lajčák was straightforward in his assessment of this year's report.
Unfortunately, it does not contain much good news.
The UN found global drug deaths have surged 60% since 2000. In the United States, increases in drug deaths have been driven largely by the powerful opioid fentanyl, while in Africa and Asia, another synthetic opioid, tramadol, is wreaking havoc in countries that already have substandard health systems. Making matters worse, powerful opioids like fentanyl and tramadol are so concentrated, with just trace amounts needed to trigger an overdose, that they pose difficulties for law enforcement efforts to track their production or intercept them before they hit the market. The continued movement of the global drug trade to the dark web and other encrypted channels has also posed problems for regulators. According to data from the EU and Interpol, nearly 2/3 of listings on major dark web marketplaces are for pharmaceuticals, illicit drugs, or chemicals used in drug production. But lest you think more traditional drugs have been beaten back in recent years, think again.
Another change is being seen in the numbers, because when it comes to cocaine and opium, they have never been higher. More people than ever are producing these drugs. More people than ever are supplying them. And more people than ever are using them.
Despite recent shifts within the U.S. and in other countries to decriminalize drugs or wind down the global war on drugs, the UN's Office on Drugs and Crime strongly condemns decriminalization as a policy tool and is led by a Russian diplomat who continues to push countries to bolster counter-narcotics efforts. Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So Chuck Schumer came out today and said, hey, our Republican colleagues in the Senate should follow the rule that they set in 2016 and not consider any Supreme Court nominee in an election year. And I said that right from the start. I mean, this is, what's good for the goose, good for the gander. You think McConnell will go along with it? Of course not. He's gloating at the fact that he was able to steal a Supreme Court seat. Schumer goes on to say Senator McConnell would tell anyone who listened that the Senate had the right to advise and consent, and that was every bit as important as the president's right to nominate. He says millions of people are just months away from determining the senators who should vote to confirm or reject the president's nominee, and their voices deserve to be heard now, as Leader McConnell thought they should deserve to be heard then. This is one of those funny things that Democrats do. They seem to think that we're all playing by the same rules. And it's cute. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's cute that, and he's going to try it because, it's what should happen in any functional democracy. If one side does it, it should happen to the other side. But understand, the right wing of this country, the Republicans, McConnell, Grassley, the rest of them, do you really think they care about the rule of law? Do you really think they care about what the voters think? And immediately out comes the RNC to provide shade for the Republicans. And they've got an excuse. They have an excuse. They put out the statement today. The GOP did argue in 2016 that a Supreme Court vacancy shouldn't be filled until after voters had their say in the upcoming election. But their argument was about who gets to nominate the justice, not who gets to confirm him or her. It was about presidential elections, not midterms. See the difference? See the difference when we didn't want Hillary Clinton nominating someone or Barack Obama nominating someone, or we didn't want to. What we did is we filibustered. And this again is the beauty of what the Republicans pull. They filibustered, and the Democrats said, okay, because they thought they were going to win. Instead of going, hey, we got to take care of this, and we got to do it now. They let the Republicans play it out. And now the country will be changed, in my view, irreparably for a generation. At least, maybe two entire generations are going to live under a type of, and this is my greatest fear, and it always has been, kind of a theocratic corporate rule. Not even, the melding of government and business and, government being, somewhat accountable to the people. But no, I see this being completely outside of government. I see government being run by corporate religious interests. And you'd better be on board. Because here's the thing, everything that we say about the Muslims and, the honor killings and all of that nonsense, I can guarantee you, once the extreme Christians get control of not just our government, but our laws, those things are going to be perfectly legal here. And I just a minute ago, I saw a case in California where a couple evidently killed a 10-year-old child. And what the reporting has come out saying is they think that the 10-year-old came out and said that he thought he was gay. And this couple burnt him with cigarettes, tons of injuries, severe head trauma, and they killed this kid. And, there's my view that at some point down the road, they were just trying to fix that young tyke. And I go, I know, Rick, that's too far. Is it? Think about the people that you see preaching on those televangelist channels. Think of how far to the extreme those people who preach gay conversion therapy are. Think of just how off the beaten path these people are. Think about those people who their only focus is undoing abortion so that they can punish those women for the audacity that they had sex. Not make sure that they're educated and have proper, family planning and birth control and all. No, can't do that. We need punishment. And we're heading to a time where crime and punishment is going to be what we see. With Kennedy going, I fear the punishment part, the law and order, the insanity that I fear comes to life. Capital punishment is going to be back in fashion, and maybe we'll have town hall executions. Maybe we'll put it on pay-per-view, solve our debt problems. And you think I'm kidding? I wish I were. And oh, by the way, if you work for a living, you're screwed. In the new corporate world, you're just a cog in the wheel. And the question is what are you going to do about it? Are we going to take this moment that's happening right in front of our eyes as history is being written right before our eyes? Are you going to take it and let it go as, well, there's not much I can do about it? Or are you going to get active and involved? Are you going to stand up, step forward, and speak out? Are you going to hit the streets? On June 30th, on Saturday, there are marches across the country. Are you going to join one of those? Are you going to stand up and say, you know what, ripping children from their parents' arms and throwing them in jail and having 3-year-olds having court dates? If you believe that's wrong, you get out in the streets. And you do it because it's right. But you also do it for when your kids and your grandkids, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, go, hey, where were you? What were you doing? You can say, I was on the right side of history. I did the right thing. I'm telling you, we got to do it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of the program thus far, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. Get the app, The Rick Smith Show app, Google Play, Apple, iTunes, all of that. Quick break. Right back with hour 2. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
Multi-billionaire brothers Charles and David Koch want to supplant America's core democratic principle of majority rule, i.e. the will of the people, with their plutocratic principle of inviolable property rights, also known as rule by the wealthy minority. Their notion is that we the people cannot be allowed to tax the riches of the owner class, nor set rules on how they treat workers, consumers, and society as a whole. To set themselves up as the new American aristocracy, this clique of moneyed elites has been spending hundreds of millions of dollars, much of it secret, on front groups and whorish politicians. For nearly 40 years, they and their uber-rich allies have torn down legal structures and mechanisms that give ordinary people some chance to control their own destinies. The Koch's goals include killing all restrictions on political spending by corporations and the rich, suppressing voting rights of students, people of color, the elderly, and others who tend to favor democratic policies, eliminating labor unions, canceling the right of workers, consumers, and others to sue corporations that harm them, shredding the social safety net, including food stamps, Social Security, and Medicare, axing provisions to protect our environment, preempting the right of local people to pass laws that corporations oppose, and packing courts with pro-corporate judges. This is Jim Hightower saying, the Koch conspiracy's attack on our democratic rights has already rigged our country's economic and political rules so the richest of the rich can now grab ever more of our society's wealth and power, thus shattering America's commitment to the common good and creating a savage level of inequality in our land. To learn more, go to the watchdog group Center for Media and Democracy. They're at exposedbycmd.org/Koch.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
It is for this reason that I must tell those who fail to report for duty this morning they are in violation of the law, and if they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated.
Whatever happened to America? She was sold 26 long years ago. Came out the door, we are jumping off the rail. And what the common John B. said.
Oh, yes, the shot heard across the boardroom. That was Ronnie Reagan firing. You say, we're going to fire those Patco workers. Do what you're told. And the weird thing about it is, you go back and you look at the history of that. He knew they were going to do it. He said he was on their side, and he stabbed those people in the back. All because they wanted safer conditions for people flying. They wanted better equipment. They wanted safer working conditions for the flying public. How dare they? How dare they care about the flying public? And yet here we are all these years later, and that assault forward has been at least 2 generations of attacks on workers. And here to share some of his thoughts on the latest attack, today's Supreme Court decision, I've asked our good friend Ted Kirsch to come talk with us. Ted's the president of AFT Pennsylvania. Ted, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for inviting me on, and I enjoy looking forward to this conversation to enlighten our listeners about what's really going on in this world, in this country.
Now, you're one of the guys who you fought the battles. You're one of those guys who built the teachers' unions. You're one of those guys who was on the front lines of taking teaching from a poverty job to a respectable wage job. When you look back at all of these years and all those battles, and you see this assault, I'm curious, in your heart, what are you feeling?
Well, I was there at the beginning, as you pointed out, and actually, I knew this was coming. We knew that when they prevented President Obama from filling a vacancy for the Supreme Court justice, was on the horizon. So I was really not surprised by today's decision. And, as a social studies teacher, I started to think about Supreme Court cases, and 3 just popped up into my mind where the Supreme Court was wrong before. 1857, Dred Scott case. 1898, Plessy versus Ferguson. And, of course, the Japanese internment case. So just because the Supreme Court makes a ruling doesn't mean they're right. And once again, I believe they were wrong.
No, I'm with you. And for John Roberts, who you go, and I've said this before, you go back and you look at his decision in the healthcare, the ACA case. He talked about thinking about the legacy of the court, and I gotta think this is the legacy of the court right here.
This is 40 years this case stood that they overturned today. A case called Abood, 40 years ago, when they said that this was proper. And suddenly now that the swamp is being filled with more gook, we have this Supreme Court decision.
And as I remember, if I'm not mistaken, the Abood decision was unanimous, I think, wasn't it?
I don't recall, but I know it was the law of the land for over 40 years until this was overturned, and we knew it was coming, and we were ready for it.
It's one of those things that, the unfortunate reality is people are going to suffer. I mean, people are going to lose wages. They're going to lose benefits. We know that this is going to be a negative thing for some people. The question is, how do you begin to mitigate that risk? I know I've spoken to the union leaders who said, we're preparing, we're gearing up. But I look at this, and the attacks are not going to stop. This isn't the end. I say this is the beginning of what is going to be fast and furious attacks on you and your members.
Well, the big money in this country has been supporting all kinds of political campaigns. When you start with the Koch brothers, the DeVos family, the Scafe's, they're pouring money into electing people who want to take away the rights of so many Americans. And, it's significant this is unusual, but today with this case, the AFT hit its highest point of membership. We had a local in the state of Oregon, a group of college professors, over 325 people join our union today, the day that the Supreme Court is trying to weaken us. We are now at 1.7 million members and growing. And our members are smart. They know about these attacks. They know what they're trying to do to us. The rich money people trying to take away the basic rights that we fought for years and years and were able to achieve through collective bargaining, through representing our members, through having contracts that both sides were obligated to follow.
You know, the Commonwealth Foundation sent out an email today. You know, the Commonwealth Foundation, obviously one of the Koch brothers state policy networks, one of the anti-worker assault groups. I would argue one of the anti-sanity groups. But they put out an email today that they were very honest, and I guess you have to give them credit now that they feel emboldened that they can be honest. They came out and they said, hey, this is a great day because for every dollar in wages and every dollar in benefits we can steal from teachers, we can use for other things. And the other things I'm sure are tax cuts for billionaires and big corporations, but they were very honest that this was really about stealing from your members.
And this is a campaign that they've been involved in not just today, but it started in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and what they have been doing, they already, and you probably have seen it, sent out letters to people, sign here, and you don't have to pay union dues. Their whole approach is, we're going to give you more money. Quit the union. Forget the protections that the union gets you. Protect your pensions, protect your jobs, your working conditions. And I would like to point out, though, you know, we're talking about teachers and I represent teachers, but this applies to policemen, to firefighters, to nurses, to public employees from other unions, not just AFT. And we were ready for this, and we have set up a campaign where people sign up and reaffirm their union membership. We already have in AFT Pennsylvania, over 1/3 of our members have kind of rejoined and said, yeah, here's my statement. I'm sticking with the union. And the fact that I was talking to a friend of mine today, I said, you remember Norma Ray? And she said to me, who's that? I said, well, she's sticking with the union. And I reminded her of that struggle that took place many years ago. And the movie made it, you know, famous, but it was all about the union and worker rights.
Yeah,
and
her name was Crystal Lee Sutton.
Yes.
Her actual name.
Yep.
But we all remember the Sally Fields up on the table with the sign. In fact,
that's right.
I tweeted out my sign today.
And so many the rallies that are happening all over the country today when this was announced. People with their sign, I'm sticking with the union, I'm union. And so we have been anticipating this decision, and as a result, we have been getting our members ready for this attack. And it's just the beginning, but it's been going on for years, and we're not giving up. In fact, I may be the ultimate optimist. I think we're going again to be stronger. Our members are smart. They understand and they see what these attacks are trying to do to us as the middle class, as the working people, and for all those issues that we fight for not just ourselves, not just the members, but for the working people in this country.
Do you think the working people of this country are ready for the kind of fight that it's going to take to build?
Oh, I think we see it happening now. I have never seen people so angry. It's that I don't have to preach. I don't have to tell them what's going on. They see what's going on. And when we just look at the reaction to the immigration fiasco that's just taking place, I don't care what they say. I don't care what the tweets say. The American people are rising up to know what battle is ahead of us, and let's start to look at the election results. And that's where this tide's going to turn.
No, I mean, it's going to come down to November, and which is why I think you're going to see this Supreme Court vacancy with Kennedy retiring. I've been saying you're going to see this be the fastest nomination and confirmation in history.
Oh, I think you are absolutely correct. McConnell is ready for it. They're going to break the rules and do whatever they can to take over the court because it's not just the next nominee. It's the years that this next nominee will be in place and the philosophy that they bring to the court. You know, as a social studies teacher, I used to try and teach my students about the separation of powers, how each group was independent. It's not what's happening in this country today.
Yeah,
we no longer see democracy as it was designed by our forefathers.
Yeah, I got to play the separation of power games at the George W. Bush Presidential Library. They actually had a separation of power game where they had a triangle on a kind of a ball, and you had to try and balance the little ball on the little triangle, the wooden triangle on the ball. It was quite
Did it
fun.
work?
And I'm sure it's one of those things W had at his desk to pass the time. That's probably not fair. But, you know, I look at this and, you know, you talk about the balance of power. Can we now agree that the Supreme Court is not impartial, that it's a political body, and that the politics of big money have taken it over?
That's clear. And when you look at the amount of money they're investing in these elections all over the country, and, you know, to keep control of the Senate, keep the House, and who knows in a couple more years what happens in the White House. But right now, this fall is a crucial time in the history of this country and the direction that this country is going to go in.
No, I'm with you. But I had someone, email me today, go, Rick, this is why, 2018 is so important. And then 2020, we get a president who's going to add 5 Supreme Court justices. Are we going to go back to that? Are we going to, is that the way forward?
No, it depends on who the president is. I'm laughing, but it's not a laughing matter.
No, I mean, we're really in a very scary time, but, laughter is probably the only thing that's going to keep us sane.
There are people that I can't even talk to anymore, friends, that we don't agree, and we just avoid any discussion. And every once in a while, when I think that, well, it's not as bad as you think, maybe there's a midpoint here, they do not change. They will find a way to defend their view, even when they don't agree with it. That's what gets me, because I know these people. I know they don't really believe this.
Or at least you hope they don't.
Well,
I mean,
that's true.
I'll be honest with you. You hope you don't. I mean, for me, I've gotten a bunch of, the maggot trolls, sending me, all kinds of vile stuff. And I just respond to them. I go, when it affects you, when it hits you between the teeth, will you be smart enough to realize that this is what it was? Because understand, these policies are not directed only at liberals or Democrats. They're directed at all people. And eventually, as wages, and I hope this doesn't happen in the public sector, but, if history has taught us anything, it's going to. As wages go down, as benefits continue to get squeezed and destroyed and attacked and stolen, that ripples across the entire economy to everybody else. So if you think you got it bad now, tearing other people down is only going to make you worse.
And it's going to come back to bite you. I asked a friend that I know voted for Trump. I said, well, and I know his wife didn't vote for the president because she couldn't vote for him either, but she hated Hillary. And I said, well, why did you vote for him if you don't like him? And I remember his answer. Supreme Court. That was his answer, and today it came to fruition.
As I was telling people in 2016, if you can't stand Hillary, vote for her only because of this, only because of the Supreme Court.
That's true.
Scary, scary stuff. Last question I've got for you. What are you telling your members as you're out talking to them? I know you're doing all the legwork and shaking the hands and all of that. What's the message to people, to your members, to folks?
Activism, to be involved. It's not just the union leadership that has to be in the forefront. It's the members. Members have to talk to members. They have to talk to each other. They have to understand. And I think we're making progress because we're getting through the voting, the activism. And look at, say, West Virginia, Oklahoma, Tennessee. This wasn't union leadership that was moving these people. It was their beliefs in the fundamental dignity of workers and what's happening to us and the people that we fight for. It's not just our members.
Right.
We want better schools for our kids. We want supplies. We want safe schools. It's not just about us, and which is how they try to paint it. You know, these selfish union people, they only care about themselves and their pensions. That's really not what's happening.
Well, I mean, you look at Oklahoma, those folks there, they were fed up. They're tired of getting the shaft. And, you know, they're already at the bottom. But the sad reality is the 22 states that are going to be affected by this decision, they're not at the bottom yet. And I tell them, and I would say, and I think the message is, you want to end up as bad as it is in Oklahoma? Look at some of those pictures. You want to end up like that? You better keep this union. You better make it strong. You better stand up and fight back. You better demand your coworkers stand with you as well.
And that's what we're beginning to see happen. It's members to members. As I said before, our people are smart. They get it. They know what they have to do. And come November, we hope we'll see a major change and shift in the direction that this country's got to go to.
I hope you're right, Ted. I appreciate your time, the thoughts, the fight. Keep us up to date on what's going on. Please come back soon.
Anytime you call, Rick, I'm available for you. Thank you.
Good stuff, Ted. I appreciate it. Our good friend Ted Kirsch, president of the AFT Pennsylvania, American Federation of Teachers here in PA. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You'll listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
First ones to starve, we're the first ones to die. The first ones in line for that pie in the sky. And we're always the last when the crab is shed out. For the worker is working when the fat jobs above. We're the first ones to starve, we're the first ones to die.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1905. That was the day over 200 socialists, anarchists, and Marxists representing over 40 organizations met at Brands Hall in Chicago to convene the founding of the Industrial Workers of the World. Representatives from groups like the Socialist Party, Socialist Labor Party, and Western Federation of Miners joined together for an 11-day convention to discuss the future of industrial unionism and revolutionary struggle. Those present included Big Bill Haywood, James Connolly, Daniel De Leon, Eugene V. Debs, Lucy Gonzalez Parsons, Mother Jones, and many more. They hoped to cohere an alternative to the politically conservative business unionism of the American Federation of Labor. They sought to build on the legacy of the Knights of Labor and their motto of "an injury to one is an injury to all." They were determined to build an industrial union that organized workers regardless of skill level. They also distinguished themselves by opening their doors to men and women, black, white, and all immigrant workers, including Asians. Big Bill Haywood opened the first day's morning session with the following remarks, saying, quote, "This is the Continental Congress of the working class. We are here to confederate the workers of this country into a working class movement that shall have as its purpose the emancipation of the working class from the slave bondage of capitalism. There is no organization that has for its purpose the same object as that for which you are called together today. The aims and objects of this organization should be to put the working class in possession of the economic power, the means of life, in control of the machinery of production and distribution without regard to capitalist masters." For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. If you got a thought, a comment, something on your mind, throw it out at me. To kind of tell you where we're going as a country. The sad reality here is the U.S. Forest Service. And this get ready for this kind of stuff all the time. The U.S. Forest Service has given a permit to Arrowhead Bottling Company to pump more water out of Southern California. Now understand, Southern California has got huge water problems. And they've just now given them a massive permit to steal water from the people so that they can bottle it and then charge people for it. I mean, this is the brave new world in which we're going to be heading. This is the corporatist world where we're heading, where, you know what, workers, consumers, citizens, name the group. You're screwed if you're not one of the corporate special interests. Just the other day, I was reading a case where I think it was Nebraska. It was either Oklahoma or Nebraska, where the Department of the Interior during the Obama years had gone after this mining company for doing mining on these people's property, whom they told they would do the mining and they would put the land back the way it was. Some of the pictures I have seen of this land looks like we dropped the mother of all bombs on their property. They can't even use it for grazing their cattle, because heaven forbid one of them fall into the hole, there's no getting them out. And remember, those regulations were protections for individuals against these behemoths who now have the power to use the federal government to do whatever it is they want to do. And to me, this is the kind of scary world in which we're heading into, where you and I, we're not going to have the ability to fight back. And again, I point to the forced arbitration clause decision just the other day. There are arbitration clauses in just about everything we do, and now it's in employment, to where you cannot get a job without signing your rights away. This is, when I first saw the case come out, I'm thinking immediately, as somebody who studies labor history and is kind of geeky about it. I'm thinking yellow dog contracts, where in the past an employer said, sign this contract that you will never join a union. You don't even think about it. And if you do join a union, you are fired immediately. We've now put something almost like that back in the law, something that the Supreme Court said was unconstitutional. We've now taken these forced arbitration clauses, which take your constitutional right to the court system away from you. Your constitutional right to seek justice from your court system has now been taken from you. It's now up to the employer's private court system, because they get to choose the justices or the arbitrators. And I had somebody say, well, there's a mechanism where, both sides can have some say, and, they pick and they choose, and there's some stuff that makes it fairer. Who pays the arbitrator? The company inevitably pays them. How many arbitrators are going to go, you know what? I'm going to not continue to rule in front of in the favor of the company who chooses me. I mean, it's rather comical if you stop and you think about it. They're rigging the game so heavily. They're putting an 800-pound gorilla on the scale, and they say, see, it's fair. And this government, the Trump administration, is putting that 800-pound gorilla on every scale. If it's the EPA, the Department of Interior, the Department of Education, the Department of Homeland Security, look, we're stealing children from their parents. And now we find out there are hundreds of children that were stolen from their parents that, who knows, they've already been deported. And, now we've got these kids. You go, well, where do you go? Where do you send them? We're going to steal them. And I get these idiot MAGA trolls who are saying, well, you don't care about child trafficking. Of course I care about child trafficking, you dim-witted puddle-brained flag monkey. Of course I do. But where are you with us stealing these kids, sending their parents, their family out of this country, and then, we just place them somewhere in the country without knowing where? My great fear, one of my many, is that our outrage mechanisms just completely blow out. That our ability to be outraged just ends. That you go, well, what else can they do today? You know, someone sends me a text every so often saying, you know, this is what happened today. And there's like a list of 6 or 7 things that would probably take down any other administration. And the cult member supporters of this administration think they can do no wrong. And the frustrating part of it is, and I come back to, you know, I remember guys who they would say, you know, I don't need a union here. I'll go and make my own deal. And they would inevitably go back and they would try and make their own deal. And quite often they made a really bad deal. And they'd end up screwing themselves out of overtime or end up screwing themselves out of something. And then they would come back to me as the union steward and say, oh, I got cheated, you know. And then you find out they volunteered to do it. And, you know, they went behind everyone's back to do it. You know, and they then after the fact, they want you to defend them because they made a really bad deal. And I used to believe, you know, go make your own stupid deals. Go screw yourself over. But really quickly, I realized that by allowing them to screw themselves over, we were all getting the shaft because we were all being expected to do the same kind of things in violation of the contract. And just, you know, I'll trade something for, I'll take some time off over here. You know, I won't tell anyone. And you go, really? What kind of backstabbing people are you? And, you know, we used to use the word scab. I'm thinking the word scab is soon going to be replaced by the word Janus. And I fear that, you know, while they're cheering and they're happy today, that eventually, as they're destroying the rest of us, they destroy themselves as well. But they're blissfully, I don't know, blissfully ignorant, brainwashed cultists. I don't know. But that they're truly fives and they're never coming around. Just kind of one of those things. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think. Any of the stories, any of the people that you know, think that way. I'd love to hear it. rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back after this.
7, yeah, and I'll go to work at night. I got no time for living, yes, I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
32 of the train cars derailed and 14 of them leaked crude oil after the derailment.
Double whammy, extreme rain and floods delay cleanup of massive tar sands oil spill in Iowa.
And they warn President Trump is ignoring one of the reasons why ticks and mosquitoes are so prolific: climate change.
Experts say diseases caused by ticks and mosquitoes have tripled in the United States thanks to global warming. If it seems like we're getting more torrential downpours and floods, it's because we are. Plus,
Dear Mr. President, there are 2 grand new bridges being proposed in Detroit between America and Canada.
a new ad on Fox News aimed at one person hopes to stop a new bridge for Detroit.
All of that bridge burning and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
We have a simple request. Please review that presidential permit. Then revoke that presidential permit.
I got a better idea. Let's just revoke the president. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, burning all of that tar sands oil leads to climate change leads to increased rain leads to increased flooding leads to a new train derailment carrying a whole bunch of cars with tar sands oil on it. I guess it's just the circle of life in the Trump era.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. But yes, more than 30 oil train cars derailed in northwest Iowa on Friday, dumping an estimated 230,000 gallons of sticky tar sands crude oil from Alberta, Canada, into the floodwaters of the Little Rock River, which has flooded due to an extreme rainfall event, up to 8 inches an hour. Officials believe that the floodwaters may have eroded the train tracks. Downstream water systems have been forced to shut their drinking water intakes. Iowa's Republican Governor Kim Reynolds declared a disaster emergency and said that the flood is hampering the cleanup.
It's a lot of mud right there, so they're sunk in pretty good. They have to remove the contents before they could even begin, especially as volatile as the soil is right now with the amount of water that we've had.
And there are concerns tonight, not just about the drinking water in the area, but as far as 150 miles downstream towards the Missouri River.
Yep, and officials now claim that nearly half of the spilled oil has been contained, but if previous tar sand spills into rivers are any indication here in the U.S., full cleanup is not possible. Now, if it seems to you like the U.S. is getting more of these torrential downpours, you are right. Scientists at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, or NCAR, confirmed this week that extreme rainfall events have increased markedly in the United States since the 1950s due to global warming, and they explained that that's why the country has seen an increase in dangerous flash floods. They also say that the warming atmosphere appears to be making storms geographically larger. Since May, at least 5 U.S. cities have been hit with these 1-2 punches of record rains and flash floods that have overwhelmed their infrastructure. NCAR projects that thunderstorms could become up to 90% larger by the end of this century. Meanwhile, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control reports that cases of vector-borne diseases, these are diseases caused by viruses and bacteria that are carried by ticks and mosquitoes, that those diseases have tripled in the United States since 2004. And the CDC says climate change is the primary factor. It has expanded the range of tropical diseases across the U.S. because higher temperatures from global warming have expanded the geographic range in which these diseases and these bugs thrive. Worse, the U.S. is not ready for the increasing spread of these deadly bugs, according to Dr. Irving Redlener of Columbia University here in an interview with CNN.
We are very far from being ready to do either the surveillance necessary or the controls necessary to keep these kinds of diseases from spreading.
Well, that's fantastic news.
Finally, in Detroit, Michigan, the wealthy Maroon family is trying a new tactic to stop a major infrastructure upgrade, the construction of a new bridge to relieve traffic congestion at Detroit's border with Canada. The Maroon family, for decades, has owned Detroit's only toll bridge crossing to Canada, the Ambassador Bridge, and now they want to stop the new bridge, already under construction, which is paid for 100% by Canada and will be co-owned by both Canada and Michigan. It would cut into the family's monopoly profits. So the family has a new ad aimed at just one person, President Trump, airing on Fox and Friends and aiming at his favorite target.
Inexplicably, President Obama issued a presidential permit and granted a Buy American waiver for Canada. So their Canadian-owned bridge didn't have to use American steel.
Well, if this ad from the Maroon family is playing on Fox and Friends, Donald Trump may just fall for it. What a maroon. For much more on all of these reports and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show. Issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So what a crazy day it has been. With the Janus case coming out, the Florida decision, also Justice Kennedy looking for the exit. Not a good day in my world. Not a good day at all. But let's find out what's going on in the rest of the world. I've got Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Luke, thanks for taking time for us.
It's a pleasure, Rick. Glad to be with you.
So what are we hearing on Kennedy's retirement? What made him go? Why now?
Well, I think one explanation has been that he wanted to see who Trump would appoint to replace Antonin Scalia, and that he was quite satisfied with the Gorsuch pick, and now he has confidence Trump will pick someone good to replace him. I will say Axios had a little scoop earlier today kind of talking about who the replacements might be. I don't think the names are all that important because they could shift, but the one thing that's shared by all these three men is they're young, 51, 52, 53 years old. We are staring down the barrel of about 30, 40-year terms, given the current state of medicine for these gentlemen, future justices. I mean, this is as if people needed a reminder. We're going to be cementing a conservative bent on this court for a generation, if not more. So it's obviously Trump is not just going to find someone who ideologically keeps the court on its current trajectory, but is going to get someone as young as possible for this job to keep that legacy going as long as possible.
Yeah, I fear and I suspect it's going to be someone much worse than Gorsuch. If I can't even imagine that, but I think it's going to happen. And I also anticipate this to be the fastest confirmation in the history of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, the term starts in October. Mitch McConnell has said, look, we want to get this done by the beginning of the fall. So, yeah, and bear in mind, I mean, you'd need every Democrat plus a Republican, I think, to stop this from going through. And we had 3 Democrats who voted for Neil Gorsuch. Yeah, and so I think, it's going to be pretty tough to see a path for Democrats to actually block this. But they will certainly try to score some points, and I don't blame them. They certainly, especially if they're imagining some sort of future where the replacement for Kennedy, dismantles Roe v. Wade or something, and we have, in a decade, 20 states banning abortion, and they're going to be remembering the fact that they didn't, stand firm here and try to stop this. They just don't really have the cards to be able to really block this.
No, and I fear even worse than just doing away with Roe versus Wade. All affirmative action programs, all LGBT rights, I think, are going to go by the wayside. I also see us becoming more of a police state, more of a surveillance state, more capital punishment, more crime and law and order, and all of that stuff, and less civil liberties, less rights, and more corporate power. I mean, that's the direction we're going.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier and writing a little tweet to try to summarize my feelings today, and said, look, more Americans than ever live in cities, something like 80% of us. And yet our government way overrepresents rural areas. 51% of Americans are women, and they make up less than 25% of elected office. We're more diverse than ever and more xenophobic than ever. And as we become more socially liberal on policies across the board, the Supreme Court is getting more conservative. And this alienation is just going to get worse. And it gave us Trump already. I don't know, when it seems to me the only way to get those trends, just, to get our government to start mirroring the country more, is to quickly, for progressives to recapture state elected offices, because that is where redistricting decisions will be made. But all those trends, which make our government look less like this country, are only going to continue as this new Supreme Court probably, weakens voting rights laws, probably pushes back on challenges to put in independent redistricting commissions, allows that to become more of a partisan playground. So, if you want to stop that alienation or try to bring this country back in line, it's going to happen quick. But because if you wait any longer, it seems like the road back to making our politics look like our country is going to be much longer to travel.
Yeah, and the other part of this is the whole idea that the court is apolitical and they only judge the law. The idea of John Roberts calling balls and strikes and decided law and all that, that's a thing way of the past. In my view. But let's move on. We know that the country's struggling, but the rest of the world's got to be great, right? And I understand there's possibly a great big summit in Russia, I guess in Moscow, right? That's coming up, maybe?
This is the Putin-Trump summit. It is not going to happen in Russia. I think the final sites for this are Helsinki, Finland, and Vienna, Austria. It's probably going to be mid-July after the NATO summit, which is kind of what our European allies fear the most, which is we're going to see some sort of repeat of what we saw with the Kim Jong-un summit, where, just before flying in and complimenting this murderous dictator, President Trump goes and disses on all of our allies and just shows, contempt for dealing with longtime friends of the United States, and that we're going to see the same thing here. I mean, Trump has already been reported to have cast severe doubt on America's role within NATO several weeks ago. I guess there was a meeting with the head of Sweden in which the Swedish prime minister was trying to explain to President Trump how Swedish foreign policy works and says, look, we're not a member of NATO, but sometimes we join them in to help out on some missions. And
Right.
Trump responded saying, hey, that's a great idea. Maybe we should do that for NATO. So we're questioning our role in that alliance. And then Trump's going to get on a plane and go and meet with Vladimir Putin, who has waging a war on NATO on all fronts, right? Trying to dismantle that alliance or weaken it or undermine it from the inside. And so that is sort of the perfect storm. And I will say, it is also amazing to sort of watch John Bolton play the role of facilitating this. This is kind of separate from my previous remark, but I mean, here's a man who a year ago was on Fox News railing about how it's completely unwise to trust the North Koreans in any diplomatic dialogue, and then he goes and has to shake hands with Kim Jong-un, and now he was dispatched to Moscow today to prepare a summit with a country he also thinks we shouldn't trust at all in negotiations. So he's being forced to do a very different role in office than the one he probably imagined he was going to do when he was enjoying punditry.
Yeah, that's okay. He can handle it. He's soulless. So I don't have any doubts that he can handle that. But if you're the other members of NATO, do you just go, you know what, just stay home? At some point, does that happen?
I mean, they kind of need him at the summit in many ways. The U.S., you do need, I think their view is, hey, if we cut NATO out of President Trump's radar, then the speed with which he may weaken America's role in the alliance is just going to increase. So we need to try and find a way to accommodate him. But again, remember the first time Trump hung out with the NATO countries, he boxed out one of the, I forget which European leader it was, but he seemed to really just purposefully
hip check him out of the way. I remember that.
Right.
Me first.
In front of the guy
America first.
The photo op. So doesn't look like the track record here is very positive about what we can expect at this summit.
Well, hey, America first, man. We're just following America first.
Boy,
he thought it was the Chow line. I don't know.
Even the Poles, who their foreign minister or Secretary of State said today, and this is someone who's quite supportive of Trump, that she's quite worried that, it's well known Putin is very charming in person, that he, understands the people he's talking to and tries to, he'll try to intimidate his opponents, but when he thinks he can exploit someone, he'll really turn on the charm.
Yep.
And the Poland Secretary of State said, look, I support Trump, but boy, we need to be worried about Trump being, won over by Putin's persuasion. And considering the fact that, I think it was, I'm going to mess up the report, but it might have been NBC that reported in January that the whole reason Trump got this idea to stop our military cooperation with South Korea as a concession to North Korea was because Putin suggested that to Trump in person at the sidelines of the G20 meeting last summer. And so, and we have ample evidence in other domains that rhetoric that Putin hands to Trump is crafted to really, excite our own president and, designed to get him to start repeating those Kremlin lines. And so I think that's all something that our European allies are concerned about happening this coming month as well.
No, I mean, we got scary things on the horizon. Let's move over to North Korea. Evidently, they're dragging their feet on releasing the remains. I thought that was that was our big victory. I thought, getting the remains back. I thought this was what we were giving all this stuff up for. Because hey, the families, the parents want these children back.
Right. The parents of people born in 1930 are clamoring for this by the thousands. Look, that in many ways could be read as, diminishing whatever, emotions surround getting these remains back. And it's obviously an incredibly important issue to people who are directly involved. But that said, this was in many ways what Trump had held out as the big concrete thing that North Korea agreed to do in Singapore. And it's a little unclear if the North Koreans are the ones dragging their feet or if this just takes longer than President Trump told us and he way oversold it. I mean, the days after the summit, Trump goes, I forget if he goes to Ohio or something, but he's holding a rally and says, look, the Remains are already back. Like his sense of the timeline here is way off. And the scale of what North Korea is doing is also incredibly exaggerated. The U.S. has pre-positioned, I think, 100 caskets at the DMZ to take receipt of these remains. There are 5,300 American MIAs within North Korean territory. So 100 out of 5,300 is nothing. And so, again, to suggest that North Korea has not only complied with this, but was really expeditious about doing it is completely false. And I'll also say CNN reports today that North Korea is rapidly upgrading one of its nuclear facilities, the Yongbyon Nuclear Scientific Research Center. So again, this notion that somehow what was agreed to in Singapore has led to any real concrete changes with regard to the U.S.-North Korea relationship, I think is off base. I mean, if they are going to comply on the return of the MIA POWs, that would be good, but we haven't seen the progress yet, and there does appear to be some signals that they are actually sort of doing the opposite of what they said with regards to their nuclear development. So we are, I think, depending on whether this news gets to Trump and he doesn't just dismiss it out of hand, we are entering into the domain that I feared and many others saw coming, which is, hey, it's good that Trump met with Kim, but it's risky when he starts praising him as an honest man, because Kim's distrust, his tendency to lie.
He's a murderous dictator.
It's going to be revealed soon,
no more needs
right?
to be said.
Yeah. So, and then what does Trump do when he feels like he's been burned? And so I think we are certainly entering into a period where we're seeing the evidence of things that suggest they're not playing or not doing what they said they were going to do.
Yeah, but it's from CNN. That's all fake news, according to him. So you can't believe what CNN says. So we can discard that.
It is 38 North, which actually which is a North Korea reporting institute that got the satellite imagery. So perhaps it's been reported elsewhere, but CNN is the first story I've seen.
Jeez. And finally, evidently, we're making child labor great again. I guess the tobacco industry is back to using kids. Is that right?
It's never really ended. This is a great report from The Guardian today, working with a bunch of human rights and civil or labor groups from around the world. They find that there are at least 1.3 million children working on tobacco farms around the world, many of them 14 years and younger, barred from school, subjected to harsh labor or physical trauma. And these numbers are going up as tobacco farming moves out of the Americas largely and towards Africa and Asia. And I will point out some brands which people, if they're smokers, are smoking, unfortunately, that have endorsed this. BAT and JTI, the companies that sell Dunhill, Lucky Strike, Kent, Pall Mall, Camel, Winston, and American Spirits, have a policy in which they say it is okay for 13 to 15-year-olds to work on their tobacco farms so long as the children have the opportunity to still attend school. So that is the endorsed policy of basically all the big tobacco manufacturers. That is a pretty scary thing to publicly stand behind, and God knows what's happening behind the scenes.
Well, aren't they just lucky to be able to go out there and pick the tobacco for Lucky Strikes? Lucky them. Jeez. Luke, I appreciate the time. Thanks for the news.
Thank you. Take care.
Our good friend Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History. On this day in labor history, the year was 1880. That was the day that Helen Keller was born in Tuscumbia, Alabama. 2 years later, she lost both her sight and hearing due to an illness. With the help of a teacher by the name of Anne Sullivan, Helen learned how to communicate again. Her inspiring story was retold in the play and movie The Miracle Workers. Keller spent the rest of her life advocating for people with disabilities, as well as a woman's right to vote and a woman's right to birth control. But did you know she was also an outspoken supporter of the cause of labor? Helen was a socialist and a member of the Industrial Workers of the World Union. In 1912, Helen sent a check to support textile workers on strike in Little Falls, New York. She accompanied the check with a letter that captured her commitment to the labor movement. She wrote of the women out on strike, quote, "Their cause is my cause. If they are denied a living wage, I also am denied. While they are industrial slaves, I cannot be free. My hunger is not satisfied while they are unfed. I cannot enjoy the good things of life which have come to me if they are hindered and neglected. I want all the workers of the world to have sufficient money to provide the normal standard of living, a decent home, healthful surroundings, opportunity for education and recreation. I want them all to have the same blessings I have. I, deaf and blind, have been helped to overcome many obstacles. I want them to be helped generously in a struggle which resembles my own in many ways." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. A new UN report on global drug use finds an increasing share of the world's population is using and abusing drugs. 1 in 18 people are now considered regular drug users, and 1 in 9 of them suffer from drug use disorders. UN General Assembly President Miroslav Lajčák was straightforward in his assessment of this year's report.
Unfortunately, it does not contain much good news.
The UN found global drug deaths have surged 60% since 2000. In the United States, increases in drug deaths have been driven largely by the powerful opioid fentanyl, while in Africa and Asia, another synthetic opioid, tramadol, is wreaking havoc in countries that already have substandard health systems. Making matters worse, powerful opioids like fentanyl and tramadol are so concentrated, with just trace amounts needed to trigger an overdose, that they pose difficulties for law enforcement efforts to track their production or intercept them before they hit the market. The continued movement of the global drug trade to the dark web and other encrypted channels has also posed problems for regulators. According to data from the EU and Interpol, nearly 2/3 of listings on major dark web marketplaces are for pharmaceuticals, illicit drugs, or chemicals used in drug production. But lest you think more traditional drugs have been beaten back in recent years, think again.
Another change is being seen in the numbers, because when it comes to cocaine and opium, they have never been higher. More people than ever are producing these drugs. More people than ever are supplying them. And more people than ever are using them.
Despite recent shifts within the U.S. and in other countries to decriminalize drugs or wind down the global war on drugs, the UN's Office on Drugs and Crime strongly condemns decriminalization as a policy tool and is led by a Russian diplomat who continues to push countries to bolster counter-narcotics efforts. Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm going to this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascist, goodbye.
So do you remember September of 2017? Do you remember Heidi Heitkamp, the Democratic senator from North Dakota, hopping on Air Force One with the Donald, the first Democrat to do so, and flew back to North Dakota there to pitch the tax scheme and how great it was going to be? Remember that? And everyone's saying, oh, she's just doing it so she can, curry favor and get reelected. And I remember saying at the time, going, look, he's going to jab her in the backside. It's going to happen. Well, guess what? The true to form, the Donald this evening was out there with the fire and the brimstone saying, fire Heitkamp, the liberal Democrat. She's not a North Dakotian. No. She's with Schumer and Pelosi. And you got to get rid of her. And you go, but Heidi, she was so good to him. She confirmed what, 21 of the 26 cabinet level nominees. She was one of those good Democrats, along with Joe Manchin and Tester. They were the good Democrats. They were going to be the trio. And the guy from Indiana, Donnelly. They were going to be the trio who were going to help Trump because they were protecting themselves. And yet here you have Trump attacking her just viciously, all because there's a Republican there who's going to kiss his ring. And this is one of those things where you go, I'm sorry, I don't. If you're in these positions, you can't bow down to this guy, because he's going to use you for what you're worth, and then he's going to toss you to the curb. And here we are. They see North Dakota as an opportunity to pick up a seat. She is probably the most vulnerable because Trump won North Dakota by a 2-1 margin. And you go, wow, what exactly is wrong with North Dakota? And I bring this back to, the old Truman quote. If you give the voters the choice between a Republican and a Democrat that acts like a Republican, they're going to choose the Republican. And this is where, the hope is that Democrats act like Democrats, that they stand on firm principles, that they move forward on those principles. And look, if you take a beating, you take a beating. But you got to fight the fights. You got to stand up and you got to say no more. And this is where we are as a country. This is the moment we're in. Are we ready for it? We've been talking. I've been predicting this for years. We're heading towards this theocratic fascism. Been saying this for years. It's been all right there, very predictable. They've been very open and very honest in their, hey, we're Christian warriors and we're going to pump out 100 units and we're taking over. And, the corporations are good and those people are bad. Are you ready for the fight? That's the question. Are you ready to stand up? Are you ready to take to the streets? Or are we just happy to have a job? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think, what you know, what you feel. Love to hear it. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you get the podcast. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for tuning in. Can't wait to see you back here tomorrow.
You've been Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show. We're working.
Time for the stereos anniversary. Democracy is coming.